Basically, I'm an occupational psychologist, spent about 30 years doing consulting on an internal and external basis. And prior to that, I was a corporate risk banker, but we won't go there. That's another story. Today, I'm going to sort of talk a little bit around recruitment and analytics. That's what I'm going to talk about. And the agenda, as you can see, short and sweet. Let's talk, just giving a few thoughts about the disruption that's happening at the moment and what does that mean for recruitment post COVID-19. Trying to then talk a little bit about why I think people analytics can deliver value across all HR functions. And obviously, I'm going to focus on recruitment in this instance. And I'm going to try and share some case studies, a number of which have been in my recent book, just to sort of bring to life what I think can be done, and then possibly just some conclusions. And as Josh said, put some questions up there on the side, and we can deal with them at the end. So hope that's going to be of interest to you. I'm going to talk for about 25-30 minutes. Let's hit it, shall we? Let's just stand back a little bit and look at the scenario that we're now facing in terms of the disruption that's around. I think recruitment's going to take some time to get back to normal, if indeed there is going to be a normal. I think if you look historically, economic downturns have tended to see recoveries being pretty slow, particularly on employment, because it's been seen to be either an opportunity for more automation or maybe just because organizations are just very risk averse. Now, we don't know what this remote working that everybody has been exposed to in a wider context. Does it mean it's definitely going to have issues on business travel, maybe even on the service industry implications? We don't know if there's going to be changes in immigration strategies. Who knows if there'll be a backlash for China because where that all came from. I think one of the things that I think is quite interesting. There was a recent report, and I would recommend that you look it up. It's free. It's on Google. It's from the Becker Friedman Institute, and they did a report called COVID-19, also a reallocation shock. And they basically have got a lot of data, and they've said that over 40% of the global job losses that have happened are due to the pandemic are permanent. So, I'm not painting a very positive picture here. We've got productivity challenges that we know have always existed. And I think one of the things we need to bear in mind is that when there are low global interest rates, organizations usually prefer to hoard onto their cash rather than incurring debt. So we've got to think that may well have an impact upon jobs and everything around that. Now, it's not all doom and gloom. I mean, Walmart hired 235,000 people in 6 weeks at the beginning of the pandemic in America. And, again, stats that are out there: for every 10 layoffs, there are 3 new hires that are being taken on board. So, there are pockets of activity where people are looking to take forward some recruitment. Now, for me, and I think it's the whole theme of what I'm going to talk about, I think this is the time for the recruitment industry and sector and all the teams to be proactive. I'm not saying data analytics is the answer, but it's a pretty fundamental part of the answer, I think. We've evolved from online recruitment through to a more connected, socially connected recruitment, and now we've been looking at intelligent recruitment, with automation, the AI and machine learning world joining the world of recruitment. But I think we've got to take some heed that organizations are going to be pretty cost driven when we get back into some sort of mode. Are they going to be in a holding pattern? Are they going to be doing business as usual? Or is this going to be a completely different organization? And I don't know whether that's going to mean more recruitment freezes or an opening up of recruitment. The automation challenge is undoubtedly going to be critical, and we need to think about the repositioning of the high touch recruitment activity that we get involved with. There is also likely to be a lot more candidates to choose from. And we therefore need to make sure that we get the right talent decisions made. And I would suggest that most of the significant activity and reports out there are all usually indicating that a more structured recruitment process that brings out data is a more predictive way of choosing people for jobs. But we need to bear in mind, in the UK, for example, office roles, vacancies down by 78%, retail vacancies down by 57, manufacturing down by 64%. I think in the Eurozone, I think the jobless rate has gone from, was it 64%, I think in February, down to up to 7.3% in May. So we've got a huge amount of challenges here. And I guess what I'm sort of saying is that this is the strategic opportunity to reflect on what you do, how you do it, and to improve. Because I believe that the critical thing here is about demonstrating business value. And that is the underlying reason why I believe data and analytics is critical to it. And obviously, as you can see on the slide there, there are RPO vendors out there. They're sniffing around. They are truly data driven. So they are looking for opportunities. And the data out there is suggesting is that they are sometimes regarded as being a better solution than an internal provider. Now, I mentioned I wrote a book which came out in April. It's a people analytics book, but actually it's a bit more than that, because it's talking about HR and the challenges that HR faces, which seem to revolve around credibility with business and the capability to change. Now, that's the function as a whole. And the book talks a lot about what we've called the 3Ds, the fact that every HR function and element within it, that means the teams within it, are probably going to have to think about these three themes as driving their activity into 2021 and beyond, which is using data, using design as a strategic intervention, and digital and the technology. Now, obviously, I'm going to focus on the data today, but I just wanted to mention is that I'm also going to be inferring that you need to think about how you can transform the recruitment methods that you use. Is there a better way of assessing people? Is it quicker, faster? Is there a neater way of connecting and ensuring that the candidate experience is going to be better? And obviously, you've got to make sure that the digital technology is right. But, my word of caution is that there's a lot of conversations out there about everybody's saying they've got an AI solution. That means it's probably an algorithmic driven solution. So there are some key questions you need to think about. And if we've got time, I can share some of those. But let's focus a little bit on the data. And because I think this isn't just for analytics specialists, okay? I do believe that possibly if you look at a lot of people analytics conferences, there are some amazing case studies. And a lot of them can be very scary for people who maybe are not as numerically orientated or as interested in numbers. So I think when I go back to basics, the key thing is we've got to think about is the commercial mindset that we have. It doesn't matter which function you're in, learning, recruitment, HR, reward, it doesn't matter. You need to have that commerciality of how do we demonstrate business value, which is where the data and metrics come in. You will hear today, obviously, a lot of interesting stories about data and how it can be used. One of the critical things that I think you need to bear in mind is that as a former HR practitioner myself, perfection was always what was expected. And sometimes you need to understand is that perfection isn't always going to be necessary. You don't need to involve all 100% of this job group. It could be you can get away with 70% or whatever. So sometimes you may have to change your mindset. But I think one of the critical things I want to get into your head is that there is a science and statistics element to analytics. Make no bones about it, there is that. However, there is a significant amount of work that can be done with just mathematics. So please don't be scared by the fact that people talk about all this sexy stuff and how it should be done. There is obviously an organizational inference when you're using data, not just from a governance point of view, but also from a cultural point of view. And obviously we can't talk about all of those things today, but there are many elements that you need to consider. And I'm not, again, trying to scare you, but what I'm trying to do is to say, if we're going to do it, we need to do it right. So I want to now just talk a little bit about how people analytics, in my mind, delivers value across all the HR functions. So not just, the talent, but also talent acquisition, also learning, etc. Now, within that book that I referred to, we've created a sort of a framework that outlines what the type of journey organizations undertake. This does not mean that this is the way in which you have to do it, by no means. I think the critical thing, as you can see, is that everything is surrounded by a commercial mindset. You have to be thinking about what is the business problem that we're trying to solve, what is the business challenge that we're trying to address, and also understanding how on earth we can try and get this solution embedded into the organization, particularly when you're changing recruitment methods and changing the way we look at things. Now, on the left-hand side is the reporting side, and that probably in level one is about metrics, which obviously recruiting has been a really key driver of bringing the metrics case to HR as a whole. Now, the level two side is where we're starting to have much more of an integrated technological solution, so that we've got maybe an information system. We may have different systems that are starting to talk to each other to actually make sure that we're understanding what's going on. We get the infamous dashboards, we get all sorts of data dictionaries, we get all sorts of analysis being undertaken by the systems as are provided. And that's a really critical part of what you do and what you need, because obviously recruitment is feeding in, and if it isn't, it should be feeding in the data that you are collecting on all the successful and, to an extent, if you can, unsuccessful candidates. On the right-hand side is the analytics perspective. Now, there are instances where there may be some one-off opportunities that occur where you can put some things together. What we're trying to do is to try and identify insights which are providing either correlations or cause effect, but certainly trying to provide something that is not obvious from what the data can immediately tell us. And obviously at level 4 is when we're really starting to get all of the HR teams working together to drive forward more of a data-driven approach to HR challenges. And again, I'll share some examples on this. The inference I really want to get across to you is that this is not about trying to make your life complicated. This is about trying to make your life accessible to the business clients and the business managers that you work for. We cannot assume that what has worked in the past is going to work in the future. And I think that's, for me, is one of the critical things. Now, I've talked about this commercial mindset. So I just wanted to give you, and this isn't a recruitment based example, but it's something you probably can relate to. I remember I did some work with a sales director, and he told me, oh, I've booked a one-day training course. It's going to cost me 20,000 euros. And I said, really? That sounds really cheap. Surely it must be more than that. And he said, no, the design and delivery of it is 20,000 euros. And I said, yeah, but the cost of the training is far more than that. And as you can see, I then broke it down. I'm not going to go into the details, but we need to be thinking about salary. Time is money. That is one of the critical foundations of a commercial mindset. Time is money. So you are here listening to this particular session, one of 4. That's half a day. How much does half a day cost? And it's not just your salary. It's also your benefits, the office space, the technology, the phones. It's all of that stuff. And then obviously, as this was a sales team, they're supposed to be accumulating sales on so much per day. And as you can see, when I shared it with him and said, well, actually, it's costing you nearly 106,000 euros for that day's training, he was like, well, I've never thought of it like that, but you've just made these numbers up. And I've said, these are the costs you need to think about when you're taking forward any decision about a people-related interaction. And I sort of turn this round into recruitment departments, talent acquisition teams need that same mindset, because I would suggest that you're probably all in a mode of survival at the moment, and probably thinking about, well, what's going to happen when we get back to some degree of normality or some degree of operational activity. And I think, one of the things I would be giving you a heads up is you need to think about these 6 basic things. What's your anticipated hiring needs? What's it been for the last couple of years? What do you believe it might be based on where the strategy of the business is? What are the basic hiring costs, the internal hiring costs? You can see them. And you might say, yeah, well, I don't really need that. And I'm saying, I think you do, because RPO providers that is the way they operate. Everything they do is based around these sorts of principles. So I think you have really got to, within the talent acquisition team, embrace those types of activities, because if you don't know the numbers, your RPO competitor will, and they will be able to project and build a story which is quite seductive for your business leaders. So please think about this, and think about the time is money, and the costs of everything you do, because that's the sort of thing that we need to start thinking about. Okay, I want to try and bring to life some of those different levels that I talked about, and these are some examples, and I know the slides will be available, so I'm not going to talk through every part of it. But the reason this is a level one, this was and I think the critical thing here is that there was an issue on turnover, and it wasn't the HR business partners who flagged it. It was the fact that the recruitment team saw this. They'd worked out that it was costing about $40,000 per role to replace somebody in quite, a specialist area. The recruitment team worked with the business partners. So point one, learning for me, and I hope for you, is please, we've got to start breaking down the silos amongst the teams in HR, because we've really got to make sure that we're thinking as one in the way that we operate. As you can see, when they found some data. They didn't, not tremendously sophisticated mathematics going on here, but they basically found that units with low engagement had staff turnover that far exceeded those units where they had high engagement. And you could say, well, that's no surprise. But the issue is that related to about 250 people per year that they were losing, which equated to about £10 million, $10 million, sorry. So what basically happened is that they were able to then work with leaders and managers to talk about the importance of engagement, the impact it was having on recruitment, the impact it was having on learning and development. And over the period of time, they were able to reduce significantly the turnover figures. The figure that the company quoted was about $15 million. So learning for me, it's about proactivity, breaking down silos across the HR teams, and keeping it quite basic in terms of looking for other people data that can give you some insight. This is an example with Parissima, who are RPO provider. So you can probably boo and hiss at it now if you wish. But it's just to give an example of what I did when I was working with one of their customers, American customers, XPX Flow. And they basically were trying to set up a new way of recruiting. Okay, they'd had internal recruiting, so they'd done direct sourcing, and they really wanted to reduce cost and time per hire. They set up a center in Dubai, in America and the UK. They had a new brand. They instigated a measurement culture into recruitment. And as you can see in the new outcomes, these are the sorts of outcomes that they were able to drive through the involvement of an RPO provider as opposed to an internal recruitment. So better quality of hire, reduced time to fill, reduction in recruitment expenditure, greater satisfaction. So that for me is a level two. It's a more systematic way where they built a system. And I think the key learning here is if you don't think about the costs, if you don't think about the proactive way in which that you can turn what you do into business speak and into language that business leaders are interested in, then RPO providers most definitely will. This was a utilities company. Again, this is still around this systematic level two. This is around call centers, the infamous call centers. They had high attrition. And again, key theme, this was a collaborative activity between recruitment and HR business partners. This is where they were talking to them, and they looked back over all the employees they've recruited over the past 2 years, and they basically found that one of the critical areas, the sifting process, which was also the most inconsistent, that there was something here around the use of a particular assessment tool. And they were then able to standardize this process as a result of looking at the data. And as a result, were able to make sure that the people they were recruiting were A, wanting to stay, B, staying longer. And it meant that turnover was reduced to 11% over a period of time, and was saving them, they reckon, about £2.5 million in agency costs, recruitment time, learning, training, all that sort of stuff. So again, key learning here of recruitment, not waiting for something to happen, recruitment proactively working with HR people to make sure that they are on the same page in trying to find a solution to a business problem. This is one of my favorites. This is a level 3. So we're now getting into the world of analytics and recruitment. This was a UK organization, a convenience chain store. Big issue was one of their business critical jobs, store managers were leaving every year. Business growth was flat. And so we were asked to go in. I was part of that team, and we looked at the recruitment process on a time is money basis. And it was costing £500,000 a year for what was probably one of the worst recruitment processes I'd ever seen. It was intuition, followed by intuition, followed by intuition. We outlined what a new process could look like, how it could be done, the time and process and tools of cost. And the CEO basically said, well, you need to show me how this is going to benefit my business because, I'm spending money here. So to do this, finance and HR, that was the recruitment team and the HR team, they worked together to build a business case. They looked at what was the difference between high and okay performers. And they found that it was sales and profitability to the levels of 400% and 190%. Finance is great for many things. One of the things it is great for is it's got lots of cash flow projections. So one of the things that was worked on was to say if we could improve the quality of hire, so that we were getting better managers and they were staying longer, what impact would that have on cash flow if we then started to look at the types of performance that the high performing store managers were achieving? So very conservative figures were provided over a 3-year period of 100,000, 250,000 and 275,000 pounds. Still a lot of money in a very low, very competitive tight margin area. The whole process was redesigned, training was done, the management was super supportive, really got it, and it changed the whole way that the organization thought about the way it brought people into their business. Over the 3-year periods, there were profitability improvements based around the type of recruitment that had been done. And as you can see, the profitability was at 95,000, 263,000 and 278,000. And one of the benefits is that, we'd lost 30% of job holders previously. We're now only losing 6.9%. So the CEO was majorly happy. The HR director was the CEO's best friend. There's a but, and the but was that the sales director had been incredibly supportive, but unfortunately he was so damn good that somebody else went and stole him. The challenge was that when the new person came in, their approach to recruitment was, I know a good person when I see one. And so what had been the infrastructure that was put in place was basically sort of broken down. And so they were moving away from an evidence-based approach. The outcome of the whole change 18 months later is that the company went bust. So my final couple of examples are around the more predictive automated recruitment. And this is the Unilever example, which is well publicized. So I thought I'd just share it. But they needed to change their recruitment methodology because cost of process was incredibly high, particularly when you've got a hugely impressive brand where people want to join. They created an online platform so they were able to assess all sorts of capabilities, all again driven by algorithms, and then went into an intelligent video interview, again with algorithms assessing multiple data points, and then going into a discovery center where recruiters, business leaders did their stuff and brought all the data that had been collected together and made decisions. Now, the reason I'm sharing it is that obviously it's showing the power that the processing of, in this instance, 30,000 people from 1.3 million applicants. That's why technology is particularly seductive. But the issue is that not only did they automate it, they got great feedback, but it also saved 70,000 hours in recruitment process time alone, which has come out at £1.6 million. We've not even talked about, whether they've made and identified better candidates as a result of that, and there's work being done on that. But just in pure process time alone, you can appreciate that executives are pretty excited by that opportunity. The final example is from Experian, and they sort of go to the next level. They basically have had attrition and turnover, which is 4% higher than they were really expecting. And it's put pressure on the whole function in terms of learning, recruitment, development. The whole system has been put under pressure. They basically went straight to this level 4 by creating a data-driven analytics solution. They've spent a huge amount of time looking at all sorts of different ways of cutting the data. They've had about 20 different factors that they brought into the way that they've looked at it, and they've been starting to implement it across their organization on a regional basis. And what has happened is that as a result of changing the way that they've not only recruited, but also the way that people have been treated once they've been brought into the business, they've been able to reduce the attrition by 4%. They've saved, they think, about $14 million over a 2-year period. And they're now in the scenario where it's not just about recruitment and attrition, but they're now starting to look at different predictive modeling work in terms of training, recognition and reward, and retention of talent. The really interesting thing of this is that Experian HR function is now a profit center because they now sell this tool externally to other organizations. So I've tried to sort of bring to life some examples about how powerful I think data is. If you look here, again, this is from the book research that I got involved with, about 750 hours worth of interviews, focus groups, workshops, you name it. But what we basically unfolded is that 6 C's. These are what every practitioner needs. They need to be curious, credible from a commercial point of view, have confidence in what they're doing, be courageous, because not every analytical study will give you a desired outcome, and you need to understand that. They need to be connected to the business, and they need to be constantly learning from their capability. You can see on the right-hand side that the future of HR, as I see, has 6 different themes. And the ones in green here, data analytics translator, a technology integrator, and a practices enabler, that's what talent acquisition teams are going to be doing, integrating talent, looking at data and enabling this practice so that it links in and is aligned to subsequent work, particularly on onboarding. This is what I think an intelligent recruitment-based data analytics translator will look like. And I know that's a bit of a mouthful, but you've got your expertise, so that remains as vital as it ever does in terms of understanding end-to-end process, opportunities for improvement, but also now showing value based on commercial imperatives, outcomes, cost, and growth. I think it's the data thing that we all need to learn. It takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. You're not going to be a statistical genius, but you need to think like a business leader, because business leaders look at patterns, trends, opportunities, value add. So we need to think in that particular same way. We need to be comfortable working with data, and we need to learn about techniques and outcomes, because you can constantly learn by working with people and understanding. And I know that Max Bloomberg, who's speaking a little bit later, will be talking a little bit about some of his experiences in terms of working and driving forward some analytical projects. The execution is critical. Yes, you'll do this. You manage recruitment projects, but I think you're going to need to think about building business cases and producing and compelling data insight stories. A compelling data insight story is not about 40 slides of PowerPoint. It's about 1 or 2 slides that are telling the business problem, what we've done, and what we can do to solve the issue, and how recruitment has a part to play in it. Because everything is about business value. And I think if we look at the future of the whole HR function, the left-hand side reflects the sorts of language, the sorts of solutions that we're working with at the moment. There was a report by HR.com with Oracle, and it was really basically saying HR is very operationally responsive, process and cost efficient, but we're not meeting business expectations. We're not going beyond. We seem to be unprepared for the future, and we're not outward looking enough. So for me, on the right-hand side, that's where we need to be much more focused on the technology that can support us to drive a positive employee experience right from the time that we first connect with the employees through to their whole life cycle in terms of learning, development, performance management, onboarding, you name it, but it's all driven by the recruitment the process that was done. We need to be operationally ever present, and we need to have that commercial focus, because that's what will build trust with our leaders when we're able to provide evidence and value. My final sort of couple of slides, if we look at 2021, I think we're all, whichever HR team you're operating in at the moment, you're in a react and survive mode. And you're probably doing some of those things. I think that this is the opportunity to review where you're at, audit what you currently do, think about how it could be better, particularly through the candidate's eyes. What is it that can be improved with more virtual hiring? What does the work outside externally say about some of the benefits from a time is money, from a predictive mode, and from identifying better people? Have a look at previous performance of hires that you've taken into the organization. What does it tell you? Are there some stories to be told? Because there is a reset that's going to come up for every organization and every function across that organization, whether it's the business functions or the support functions. So you need to identify what's the new normal for recruitment. Because if you don't do it, I would suggest RPO vendors will, or indeed business managers may say we haven't got time to think about that. So I guess my final thoughts are, please, in recruitment, you're in a battle here. There's going to be a battle to try and get the best talent, because there's going to be more people out there. So we now need to think in monetary terms, the language of the business. Time is money. It's quite scary how much time is just written off. The thing is, people analytics takes time. It's a journey. You're developing expertise. You're developing a culture. Everything is based around decisions of which data and evidence is a significant part. We're trying to make better informed decisions. We're not trying to take the decisions away from managers. I think you need to look at your relationships with other data providers and really look for new opportunities to see if you can improve the organization's cash flow. And outliers is one of those methods of looking at what's the difference between high performers and okay performers. And again, I think Max Bloomberg, who's speaking a bit later this morning, he'll be bringing one of those types of examples to life. Every part of HR has got to model the financial impact of its practices. We can't just think, oh, this is all going to go away, whatever, I don't need to bother. You do need to bother, because at the end of the day, now is the time to be proactive. We cannot sit back and wait and see what is going to happen. You have got the opportunity to put your case forward as to what you think could be done in the next future. So that's me. That's the book that came out in April, so you can get it there, and you can get a discount if you're interested. And also think about this. Max Bloomberg and myself, who do some work together, we've got something called the Positioning Game People Analytics Community. And we believe that we need to help people to demonstrate their commercial credibility. And so we're building a people analytics community where we can connect and discuss what the implications of all of these external changes are going to have on the world of HR and people analytics. So it's a learning process. So maybe if you're interested, connect with Max or myself through LinkedIn or any of the other formats that you can see there. And we'd be delighted to see if there's something that can be done as a community to try and help people become more comfortable in the world of data. So, Josh, I think we need to go to questions. Sorry, I've gone over a couple of minutes, but I think we've still got 10 minutes or so for questions.
No, it's absolutely fine. That was a fantastic presentation. So thank you very much, Dave. Yeah, now is the time for Q&A. So if any of you have questions, feel free to write them into the chat, and I will be giving them to Dave. So just to start off, well, one thing I thought was particularly interesting was someone in the chat mentioned that you ought to find out what methodology your sales team uses and mirror it. Is that something that you generally think is good practice, or are there certain circumstances where that might not apply? What are your thoughts on that?
I've got to be careful, because I don't want to take away what I think is going to be what Max is going to talk about in that particular, because I think Max is going to share a sales-related case study. And so I think that could be... you
don't want to step on his toes.
I don't want to step on his toes. My personal perspective is sales is a great area where you can access data quite easily, because everybody, as you could see from the example I gave earlier, you can work out the cost of a salesperson per day. You can work out what they should be, their average sales they should be acquiring per day. So with that sort of quality of data, you've immediately got something to work with in terms of, now let's look at the difference between what good ones do and what okay ones do. So I think definitely identifying what is good and what is okay, that in itself is a challenge, because and again, I don't want to take away Max's story, but from lots of other job analysis work that I've done over many years, that you will never find an easy consensus around people deciding what they think is the thing that makes a great practitioner. Some people in sales may say it's, well, because they've got high egos. Some people say it's because they're a great experience. Some people say it's knowledge. Some people say because they're a real so-and-so, and therefore, they're going to kick backsides of people and get stuff done. So I think part of the biggest challenge, I think, is actually getting consensus on what really is a high performer in the sales team and what it is that drives that team. I think that's the critical thing. And then once you've identified what the characteristics are, then you can start to, as the question said, mirror it, start to replicate it, or at least try to aspire to achieve people who have some of those capabilities, requirements, attributes.
Okay, oh, very good. Okay, Jan has just written into the chat. One common problem seems to me the lack of job performance KPIs. Without these KPIs, improvements in recruiting go unnoticed. What do you think is the current development with regards to such measurements?
Yeah, great question. I mean, performance management obviously is not a strength of most organizations. I think we've got to be honest about that. And obviously there is lots of conversation, and lots of organizations have talked about, oh, we got rid of performance management and replaced it with something. The something usually is something not that far away from KPIs, to be honest. I think it was a point I sort of made during the session, is that metrics, recruitment have in particular, I think, raise the game on metrics, because they introduce time to hire. Quality of hire has become a particularly critical one, looking to the future. So I think whether it's KPIs or whether it's metrics, I think they need to be thinking in a more metric based way to try and identify something that equates to adding business value. That's the key for me. It's this business value, because KPIs are all well and good, and it shows that somebody's done this and somebody's done that, but we've really got to align it to what the business problems and the business challenges are. People will say we need to recruit 20 people. That's not the business problem. The business problem is that we're looking for people who are able to drive what that job is requiring. So I think we've got to think in a more metric based way, to not replace KPIs, but to make them more robust and make them more accountable, because metrics make people accountable, and maybe not everybody likes that, but at the end of the day, that's where this courage comes in. You've got to stand up for what you believe in and how you want to do it, and you've really got to drive it forward. People will talk about all sorts of different, OHRs or OCRs or the next thing people are talking about. It's all measurements, and I think the key thing is establish a business goal that's aligned to a business need and make somebody accountable for achieving it. And that's the simple part of any KPI. It's the method of how you go about it, not necessarily the actual KPI. It's the measurement of it.
Okay. And Jan says thank you. So I think that answers his question quite well.
Okay.
So the next question is from Mo. Is becoming a regular here. I know he was very involved in the previous one. Thanks. Nice to see you again, Mo. He asks, there are different ways to assess quality of hire. It has always been a hard metric to quantify. In your opinion, what is the best way to define quality of hire?
Yeah, a great question. And funny, I to reduce time, I took a quality of hire case study out because I didn't want to. I wanted to have plenty of time for questions. Quality of hire is a difficult one. Point one, there is no generic quality of hire measure, I believe. That's point one. point two, I think you have genuinely got to look a little bit back into the good old world of job analysis and looking at what are the real critical things that are driving that particular quality of hire challenge that you may have. There was a piece of work I did with a very large German logistics company, and they were looking at the fact that they were just losing project managers hand over fist, and the ones they were getting were very experienced, but they basically found out they were basically the people who were not very good. They were experienced, but they weren't very good. And so when they built the quality of hire metric, they were aligning it around behaviors, around attributes and experience, so that they then measured the quality of hire around that. They then introduced quality of line manager satisfaction around performance of the individual, how many people had stayed. So there's a whole different range of elements that you can introduce into the quality of hire. And I think they need to be specific to the job family or the particular area. I'm not a great lover of having just a generic quality of hire, because I don't really think it gives you that level of detail that enables you to have a conversation with business managers that says, that's why you now need to change your recruitment. That's why you now need to change the way you manage people. Because I think one of the critical things of a quality of hire is we need to find out not only A, are they any good, but B, also how long they're staying. And that therefore starts to bring in other issues such as onboarding, performance management, engagement. And so I think the more you can start to bring other elements in, the more it starts to show a more aligned approach between recruitment and the other talent practices, if that helps.
Oh, thank you very much. And so another question I would ask, so Mo says, great, thank you, is you mentioned on one of your slides in terms of confidence, courage, those sorts of qualities in an HR practitioner.
Yes.
Are there particular qualities that you think for most HR specialists would find particularly easier to develop than others in this respect, or does it really depend?
That's a toughie. My honest opinion, I mean, I've worked in and around HR now for 30 odd years. And prior to that, as I said, I was a corporate banker. My concern is that a lot of HR practitioners, I'll talk about the wider family, tend to be probably a bit risk averse, and probably tend to lack a bit of confidence. And that's probably because, you know, HR, you don't join HR to be loved by people, let's be honest. Okay. And I think the courage is a really important aspect, because there are things that they need to understand that are going to get done that may not be very easy to talk to business leaders about. And so I think that the influencing and the impact are particularly tough. I think, you know, the ability to problem solve and the ability to collaborate, data, and again, this is in the book from our research, has shown that actually HR is pretty good at problem solving and collaborating. My challenge is that I'm not sure that they maximize the benefit of those behavior sets. So I think those are things that they're good at. I think it's the impact, it's the ability to stand up and to be resilient and to basically challenge, that's the key word, challenge the business. Because, you know, I'm always interested. I get involved in a lot of transformation programs, and one of the things that always interests me is why this is the third transformation program this year, and inevitably it's because they got it wrong the first time, and they inevitably got it wrong because somebody didn't challenge the business leader and say, that's a bloody stupid idea to do, that's not going to work. And I think whether you're in HR, recognition and reward, engagement team, OD, learning, or talent acquisition, we have got to get some courage and got to challenge in a positive and in an insightful way. Because I think that's another reason why, if you've got data and evidence to help you, to support you, or to project forward what you think is going to happen, that can at least start to make business leaders think a little bit differently about how they are working.
Okay.
That's a big question. That's a session in its own.
We'll just have to bring you back then, right?
No.
So you spent a lot of time talking about moving up between the different levels for the companies
Yes.
and how they adopt this sort of approach. Are there some common pitfalls you'd like to talk about what they should watch out for when trying to move between the levels, or maybe how you can avoid even moving backwards
Yeah,
potentially?
common pitfalls that um, common pitfalls are first one, HR to do this in isolation. Okay, if you do this in isolation, I don't think you're doomed, but you're going to find it hard because I think one of the critical things that I've learned, particularly as I'm writing these various case studies, is that you've got to engage with stakeholders, business leaders, and help them understand that we're introducing data and evidence to make better decisions, not to take the decisions away from you. So I think facilitation, collaboration is critical throughout. Do not do this on your own. Okay. Yes, by all means, do a one-off proof of concept activity, absolutely. But if you're going to then start to introduce it across a wider sphere, you really do need to work with managers and leaders because you're going to need to educate them about where this fits and how their role will stay the same and how it may change. That's the first thing.